Hello all, welcome to our Angular Meetup online. On this session, we have really awesome speakers. If you've been, before we started recording, you know that we've been talking a lot. You can ask any questions, the best speakers ever. Well, I have to say that our sponsor for this meetup is Labs. Labs is, well, will be your best partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. You can find out about them more at Labs. I'm part of their team. I definitely would love to hear any problem you have, see how we can help you. So I also want to say some announcements. We do also other frameworks, other meetups on other frameworks like React and Vue. We have a meetup on React on February 13, 12:30 PST, 3:30 PM EST, so this same timing. And next we have another on Vue on February 20. So if you are into all or any of those, feel free to join us. And our next Angular Online is going to be a special session. We're going to talk about the state of Angular. Did you miss it? It's in March 5th. It's this same time, 12:30 PM PST, 3:30 PM EST. As I said, we have really awesome speakers today. We have Tara, which is going to talk to us about JAMstack, a lot of cool stuff that's really everybody's talking about right now. So she's going to teach us about it. And then we're going to have Ben Lesh. Ben Lesh is, well, I believe he's one of that wrote RJS. So he's one of the core there. And so he's going to teach us a lot of that about testing. I hope that he can clarify any doubts that you have today. So for our schedule today, well, we're going to start by Tara, and then we're going to switch to Ben, and that's it. So I leave it up to you, Tara. Good luck.
Thank you, and thanks for that intro. When you said Ben Lesh for a second, I thought you called him Leshy, and I was like, I like that. New nickname. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in and share. We're going to go over some slides in the first place, and then we will switch over to some live coding after that. Because I feel like I can tell you a lot in words, but it's not really going to really stick until we look at the code for it. So I'm here to talk about Angular on the JAMstack, and I know that this is a term that is coming out a lot. The JAMstack, you might see it more and more places, especially recently, but not be the most familiar what exactly it is. So first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Tara Manicsic. You can find me on Twitter at TZManix. And this is how you'll see me online. It's my awkward dog, Tosh Magosh, and my photoshopped baby, Nico, on there. And I am the Angular Developer Experience Engineer at NETLIFY. Just real quick, what that means, Developer Experience Engineer, it's actually kind of a mixture of engineering and developer advocacy, where we kind of look at how Angular developers are using NETLIFY and then making whatever necessary changes we need. And we also actually do a 3-month rotation on the engineering team to implement what we think needs implemented and actually just get extremely familiar with the project every year, diving in solely working on engineering. So it's kind of a unique thing to developer advocacy teams, and one of the many reasons I joined NETLIFY. I was actually talking a lot about NETLIFY before I even joined because I like their product so much. So we will be talking about NETLIFY in here because that's how I push my JAMstack sites. So moving on, I want to do a bit of a quick introduction to give you all the words that you'll see surrounding the definition of the JAMstack. This site is extremely useful. It's jamstack.org, and they have the best description on here. It's basically, JAMstack is described as making fast and secure sites and apps delivered by pre-rendering files and serving them directly from a CDN, which is a content delivery network. And a CDN is basically a dumb server. So it's You know, back in the day when we used to make applications, we were basically file sharing, right? So we were taking files, putting it somewhere that other people could access it. There was no logic that was happening over there. And so we kind of got really complicated after that. We gave more logic to what the servers were doing. We tried to make things more dynamic by adding more logic. And now, you know, there's a lot that you can do online and it just gets more and more confusing. So when we look at a CDN, we're kind of taking down that logic. We're just putting information on there that people can grab. So it happens a lot faster. You're basically removing, like it says here, the requirement to manage and run web servers. And that's a really big thing when it comes to the JAMstack. One of the main concepts is you're thinking about how can I basically distribute what needs to be done to get my site iterated, to get my site to the audience, to make it happen faster? How can I delegate a lot of these responsibilities that usually slow down the production of our engineering team? And so one of the things is managing your servers. And I also want to kind of show you, this next slide has a lot of text, but you do not have to read it all. I just really like how they break down these best practices of the JAMstack, because I think it gives you a really good high-level overview. And I just want to touch on a few of these things. So when it talks about the entire project on a CDN, you're basically talking about doing a lot of pre-rendering. So you want to deliver a static site, and when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that it's a stagnant site. You're putting more and more information up there via the next one, which is everything lives on Git. So some of the ways that you can do this is, say you have, a new comment coming in. There's a really good example of this with Smashing Magazine. When they have comments come in, the comments are basically pushed to, like, they have that information that is hooked to a NETLIFY function or a serverless function, and that information gets added to a page in one of their files in their GitHub repo. And when that change is made, that will trigger a new build, and that new build builds the site with the new comment. So everything happens on Git so that it's version controlled. It's easy to go back and see where things may have messed up and revert back to something that works well. And it's really great for teamwork because everything lives in one place. So it's easy to manage, it's easy to keep in line and see how the team is updating it. And actually gives a lot of empowerment to your developers to be able to know what's happening in Git. But then you can also use your modern build tools with everything that you're doing, like post CSS and Webpack, and be able to still have those standards. Because the way that I like to think about it is we're taking what we have learned with what makes sites fast and evolved it to adapt it to the new modern tools as they've advanced so much since we've started creating websites. So instead of like layering, we're saying, okay, let's take a step back again. What worked in the beginning and what can we utilize from the tools that are really great in this day and age? And this also goes with the Git part. You have atomic deploys and the automated builds. The automated build process is really great because it helps you iterate faster and get fresh information out there. And atomic deploys, you won't have anything that is like dwindling behind because everything gets destroyed. Everything gets cleared out when you do a new site. So it's not like, okay, well, was this changed on V2 and now we're on 2.5, but that didn't change, then you don't worry about that. Just you're wiping everything out and redeploying, which also gives you instant cache invalidation so that there's no any of the doubt that happens with what your CDN is handling because it's purging everything. So again, these are just the best practices. Nothing in particular has to have all of these things in order to be a JAMstack. Like the biggest things about the JAMstack is working with pre-rendered content as much as possible that delivers to a CDN, so that you're getting rid of the onus of working with servers. And this is described much better and much more thoroughly in this book, Modern Web Development on the JAMstack, by my two coworkers, Matt and Phil. They describe it really well, and they give you some, the Smashing Magazine case study that I was talking a little about before is a really great one, because basically Smashing started out with just blog posts, and they were on WordPress. And they started to get more and more complicated because they had publishing sales and ticket sales to conferences and just, tons and tons of blog posts. And everything was getting weighed down. The development process was getting extremely complicated because there were just so many different places they were doing things. And they made a huge jump in the JAMstack. And actually, I didn't write the numbers down, but they are in this book. But I think it was like a 6x site delivery time improvement. And there's, I'm happy to share numbers after this. Maybe I'll even tweet them out. But it's really great to see what's happening with the improvements you could get out of the JAMstack. I just realized I do have chat open. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them into there. So the next thing that I want to talk about is basically describe to you, like what is Angular? I'm just kidding. You know what Angular is. This talk is about. I want to talk, though, a little bit of like what is Angular doing in the JAMstack. I feel like I got this position at NETLIFY doing Angular specifically, developer experience, and people are like, what does Angular have to do with the JAMstack? And people in the Angular community were like, what's the JAMstack? And it seems that it's coming out of nowhere, but really, like Yuri had this talk at, what is this, Angular NE, I think? Wait, BE? Angular BE, right?
Yep, BE.
And, thanks. And so he was talking basically about building high-performance static websites with Angular. And the need that he had was, a lot of people deal with trying to get better SEO on their Angular sites and trying to, make content deliver faster. So there are all these needs that the Angular community had that it wasn't apparent how it could be solved. And when you look at the JAMstack and see how the JAMstack is built, it's exactly what, your URI needed, 3 years ago. So you see a lot of people figure out what's the best way to pre-render Angular so that we have better SEO, so you have better delivery. And I think this is a really exciting point of the JAMstack has existed for some time, a few years, and you see React and Vue in there so much. But people thought that Angular was too heavy to go into the JAMstack, and there was no big pre-render story. And now we see not only Angular Universal is going to have a better pre-render story in V9. I didn't put too much documentation because it's not fully documented yet, but I will be releasing more posts working with Universal for pre-rendering. But we also, drumroll, have the very first designated static site generator for Angular apps. And we joke about this because, so this is NG Heroes, and they released Scully. Scully is the static site generator, and this happened, I'm trying to think if it was just the end of last year or beginning of this year, but I think they have moved to beta now. And the running joke is that everybody was like, I'll pay somebody to build this. I really want this. But it was years that we've all been asking for this. And finally, they're like, okay, all right, we'll build it. And so thankfully, they built that. And that's what we're going to be using today as we code some stuff out. But you can see here, they're looking for, they have a big plugin library. I have a whole blog post that I'll point you to after that talks about Scully in general, and then how to build out a whole Scully site. But I'm going to be coming up with more because they keep doing more. So to keep up, I'll keep writing more. But I want to jump in now and just start building JAMstack app out. And basically what we're going to do today is just, we'll create an Angular project, we'll add some routes, we'll make them static, and then we'll throw it onto the CDN, we'll throw it onto NETLIFY, and then we're going to set up continuous integration, continuous deployment. And I am in the process of doing a schematics for NETLIFY so that we don't have a very quick and easy CI/CD story for Angular, unless, ping me if you have one that's your go-to, but I want to make it as easy as doing a ng-add Anglify, which is my Angular NETLIFY thing that I'm trying to make happen. And then that will easily set up a connection to your repo to set up CI/CD. In the meantime, though, let's go ahead and, how easy is it going to be to close this app? That wasn't too bad. Okay, what do I have up here? Do I need to make that bigger? Is that big enough?
Looks fine.
Yeah.
That's fine for me, but if someone says something,
I'm seeing nodding. And Ben's #1 enemy says it's cool here. Just kidding. Okay, so we're gonna start, let me change here. Sorry, I should have prepped my directory. Is this where I want to be? Yes. So this is familiar to you. If you're used to the CLI, we're just going to make a new one. Let's go ahead and do this so we don't have to answer any questions. I'm always not sure if this is saving me time or not. So basically, I'm just going to create this real quick, and then we're going to add 4 routes, because that's the biggest thing in making the static application is creating it so that your routes make static HTML pages, and those HTML pages are what's going to get pushed up to the CDN. So not only is it going to give you a response time that's super fast, but also it's easily cached. And there was something else I was going to say about that. Super fast, easily cached. I don't know. I'm sure I'll remember it later. But one thing that I think is really exciting about Scully, once we start using it, you'll see it's quite simple and straightforward, but also you can use it with AngularJS and Angular. Sorry, there was something that sounded like a gunshot out my window. No worries. Okay, so let's go ahead and change into that directory. Clear this out so we get back to the top. And then, so we're just going to use ngg to make some modules and add routes. It's funny, I swear I barely look at my keyboard when I type normally, but live coding, it's just like, what are keys again? Sure, you're welcome, Google. And then, so we're gonna do home and about. Should really bump it down so it stays on one line, but say blog. Let's just do 3 in the essence of time. Okay. So we have those. Let's go ahead and go into the app module and delete all of the filler information. wrong. All right. Okay. And then I just wanted to get rid of that. And then let's see, I just want to show you that we have all of our so yeah, you see we have home, blog, and about as their separate directories. And I'm just going to go ahead and build real quick because you need to build for Scully to be able to read. And we can do ng build prod, but I don't want it to take as long as that. So I'm just going to do plain old build. And every time you run Scully, you're actually going to want to build before it because it's going through your app and it's seeing the routes that you've made and basically scraping your application to see what it needs to build out into separate HTML pages. So you want to build every time before you run npm run Scully. And I've just made a script for that on other applications because it's a lot easier, but for the sake of time, we'll keep it simple. All right, so we have that built out, and then we're just going to do ng add it Scully io init, right? Yeah. I don't know why I'm squinting. That's huge on my screen right now. So as with most schematics, like this is a schematic that you're running for Angular. So it's installing that library via npm, and it actually adds some information to your package.json. And you see here, it's adding some polyfills, and it's adding some imports to your app.module.ts to use Scully. And I'm pretty sure with Angular Universal, you just run pre-render to pre-render everything out. I still have to do some tests to see how everything gets populated and differentiate between the two, between Scully and let's see. I think I just released 9 a few minutes. They released it a few minutes ago. They released 9 a few minutes ago. Haha, cool. Let's change the talk completely in the 8 minutes I have left. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so Scully, I just want to show you real quick now. If you look at, oh, let me back up. Car, what does car do? So you see here, we now have 2 Scully scripts. Scully serve will actually, what does it do? You can see what it looks like being served via a local server. So that's a nice shortcut instead of setting up your server to do so. Okay, so one thing I want to do real quick is just be able to have the routes that are clickable links to show you. And there's actually a really great tool that Scully has called the Scully Route Service. So let us, where am I? I was in code. Okay, there we go. I need to set this up correctly. And I want to open up component.ts, right? Yes. All right, so we're just going to import, it's called Scully Routes Service. And that is from Scully IONG-lib. And we're going to add a constructor down here to pull that in. Excuse me. What do I want to add? I want to add it as public Scully. We'll say Scully route service. Yes. we happy? I think so. And then we're just going to add a bunch of ULs here, or LIs here for each of the routes, and just call inside there an ng4 route. Yes. And so this was when we call Scully, and we're just going to say Scully.available. So it's using that route service to look at all the available, and we'll have it come through asynchronously. And for each of, hey now. For each of those, sorry, I have an office bedroom. And so my husband just texted me and he was like, can you let me know when your meeting's done? I really want to change my clothes. Oh, that's sad. Okay, we're gonna add a router link. Let's get rid of all of this and just put route. And I don't care about that. Get rid of that other one. Just to keep it simple. Yeah, that looks right. Feel free to pair code if you see something. If you see something, say something. And here we're actually gonna just say, make it say the route title or just route. Oof, 4 minutes. Does that look right? Let's say yes. Let's go ahead and ng build. So what's nice about that, I mean, just in general, having a way to look at all the available routes by basically scraping and seeing what routes there are and then have it in a place where you can manage them is great. In the blog post I have where I'm using Scully, we actually go through and make a list of users. So it references, it's a plugin, it's one of their plugins where it references a JSON list. And it sees how many users there are and it makes a route for each of them. And then with this, you can show all of, we're gonna serve it up real quick. You can see it has a link then for every single route that exists, which is really great for blog posts. But there's actually also a whole blog post schematic or thing for this in general. Why didn't it like that? Huh? Oh, live coding. Let's see. What didn't it like? Oh gosh. I have 5 minutes, or I have 2 minutes left. Let's see. No, it doesn't need Scully Serve. Scully Serve is just an option to do your, yeah, Scully, it should have been generated by using that Scully route service. Scully IO nglib. That all looks right. Did I build? I did build again because I was yapping all through that build. Let's just try one more time to build. And if it doesn't work, sorry, I should have timed this a little bit better. In the meantime, let me show you these last few slides real quick. Because I actually have a blog post covering all of this. But first of all, there's one blog post where I talk about what Angular in the JAMstack is in general, basically saying, you know, with all these best practices, where does Angular fit with all of those? And then talking about using Angular with NETLIFY. I was going to run through that today, but I just timed that poorly. But you do basically hook it up to your GitHub, and when you hook it up, you just give it 2 commands of basically the project lives in dist or in dist static if you're using Scala to pre-render, and then your build command, which would be ng build -- prod or however your command is. And once you have that set up through the NETLIFY UI, it connects it to your GitHub repo that has that project. So anytime you push up to your repo, it will rebuild your site for you. So that's how the CI/CD comes into place. And then everything works correctly in this repo and through this blog post if you want to jump through there and try it out. I'll also, once I figure out what the problem was, I'll tweet about it and share the solution with all of you. It may have just been I didn't build it out because I ran it again right before I joined you all. So maybe a typo. I'll tweet it out and let you know. But yeah, check out this blog post. It's on the netlify.com/blog. And like it says here, we pre-render an application. We feed the information to that JSON file to render the pages and do create a blog and stuff on there. So feel free to check that out. I don't want to take any more of your time. So I'm just going to leave you there and we'll let you know what the solution ends up being. Oh, my other site got lost, or my other slide. But yeah, you can find me at tzmanix on Twitter. And yeah, feel free to ping me if you have any questions about where I failed.
Thank you, Tara. I actually enjoy it. I love this, all these new things and the new technologies. Scholly team is being really helpful. The other day I had an issue. I tweeted to them and they answered me like in real time. We jump on a call, they help. So yeah, definitely everybody should take a look at it. It's a very interesting project. And thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
So are you ready, Ben? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
No problem.
I was just moving things around on my screen.
Start with you. Ready?
Let me try to get everything over onto one screen because I have 2 monitors here and they're both horrible. All right. So, and then share. So much chasing windows around. You think after like 20 years of using computers, I would be able to find windows when I need them, but I can't. All right. Share. Okay, can everybody see my super awesome Nintendo controller?
Yep.
This is honestly, the CSS work here I did is probably the most important thing I'm gonna in my talk. I'm kidding, of course. I spent way too much time messing with that, but so like I wanna talk about RxJS testing. I'm not as professional as Tara. This is all just gonna be free form, kind of live coding stuff. But what I have here is this really dumb app that I've created that this has buttons, and what you can do is you can try to enter the Konami code, and you see it already detected that I did not enter the Konami code. So if you're not familiar with what the Konami code is, it still exists from time to time as Easter eggs in various games, but a long, long time ago, when I was a kid, so like, you know, dinosaurs roamed the earth and whatever, they had a Nintendo, which had a controller that looked like this, for you younger folks. And there was a secret code you can enter in most Konami games called the Konami code. And it went up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start. So this is B and this is A. You can actually see it if you highlight it, but well, maybe not. I made them invisible, but anywho. So if I go in here and I do this quick enough, up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, and then start, you should see that this switches to true because it detected that I entered the code. But if I do the wrong thing a bunch of times, it tells me false. And this is all implemented with Rx. I have an app here, and I'm gonna try to make this a little bit bigger so we can see. Kill the app. We don't need to look at this as much because we already know what the app looks like. So let me kill that. And pardon me because I switch back and forth between Mac and Windows a lot, so I keep hitting the wrong control key. But so this is the basic component. It's very, very simple. I've got this subject of actions, and then anywhere I click, I'm just kind of pumping these string values into it, right, down, left, select, start, A, B. Very, very, very simple. And then I made this operator called Konami code, the implementation of which is over here. And we're going to look at that in a minute. But generally speaking, when I'm dealing with really, really heavy RX stuff, I tend to make custom operators. And that is because what a custom operator really is it's this like higher order function. So you'd be like my operator, and it returns a function of this shape where you've got some observable and you make it into a new observable. So every single operator is just this. So you can pass in arguments or whatever and do whatever you like to the observable inside of here, which is effectively what this is doing. I have a higher order function and it returns this function here that takes an observable and returns an observable, if everybody can see that. And I have some tests already written for this. And these are just your standard tests that you would use for just general Angular development. And honestly, the most important thing, so when people start thinking, oh, you know, this is using some RX thing, and the reason I use this example is there's a temporal element. So when you're like, if you're using a lot of RX, you should only really be using it because you're either dealing with meshing different streams together in some way where it requires you to really like compose the events in some way, like to combine them or join them or what have you, or split them up. Or there's some sort of temporal element, like you want to collect values over time, but only a specific amount of time. So entering a certain combination on a controller is a good exercise for this, right? Like, so say you're trying to make like a Street Fighter game or something like that, maybe you would do this. Now, you might not do this in Angular per se, but for controller stuff, but you could. And this is just a contrived example to try to keep it down to a minimum. I'll try to dive into other more practical examples later. But generally speaking, when you've got a lot of RX or any RX in your code, what you should really do to test your components is you should use the test bed and set it up appropriately. And you could even have this in your test if you like. Well, actually, a lot of the Angular core framework sets this up in each test. But you create your fixture. Generally, I call detect changes first because that gives me the ability to find the elements that are already inside of there, because a lot of elements won't render until you detect changes. And then I go through and I just select all the DOM elements that I need. And in this case, I'm calling click on them, and then I'm verifying in my output, which you can find here, that is what it needs to be after I detect changes. This is the best way to test your components. Like, forget if you have to mock the RX that goes in, and I'll show an example of that later on. That's fine, but you can mock it with of, you can mock it with a subject. Like, do the simplest thing. You do not need marbles to test your components. And in fact, the marbles, because what they're doing is they're virtualizing time for the observables, oftentimes don't work well with things like fake async and zones and some of these other things, and can cause real headaches. So I'll get to marble testing in just a bit. But most importantly, when you're dealing with these with components, what you want to do is do what's effectively kind of an end-to-end test within the component itself. Another thing to do, like I do a lot of React development now also. And Jest is a really cool thing to look into, because Jest and like things like there's React testing library. Look at those as examples. I don't know if they have one for Angular per se, but their whole tenet is, trying to find things as they would exist on the screen to the eye. So like find something by the text that's in it, or that sort of thing, which you could do with a query selector if you wanted. But regardless, find the buttons that you want to click them, detect changes, and then assert that the thing is actually changed. I know there was RX that executed in there, but that's an implementation detail. If you're using marbles, what you're doing is you're testing some, unit testing some implementation detail of Rx. So I'm actually going to add one more test here. So right now we've got two tests. One is a happy path test that says, let's see, this is just, it should work for the Konami code. So this is, I am effectively synchronously clicking all these things, right? Which no one's, I mean, unless you're the Flash, you really can't do that. And then I'm saying this much time has passed because I know there's a delay in there. And then I'm detecting changes and I'm seeing that it's true. The other test I have is if you're too slow clicking things, so let's just say that I wait a full second before I actually get to clicking A, we still have that it's false, and then I wait a while and we still have that it's false. So basically just making sure that if I'm too slow entering the code, it doesn't let me have it anyway. So there's a time limit. Excuse me, my mouth is dry. All right, so if I run both of these tests, and I'm just using Angular CLI, and it compiles, So we see that we've got no failures and we passed. Now, one additional test I think I would like to add in here is I want to make sure that if I type the wrong sequence, it should immediately say, oh, well, you know what? I need to have, excuse me one second, I'm very sorry. I've got my kids at the door, they're coming home from school. So really sorry, hold on.
In the meantime, I can let you all know that I never ran npm run Scully. So then it didn't have the routes that it needed inside of that Scully.json, and that's why I saw that Scully.json error. So just after you make your site, after you build your site, npm run Scully, and then when you serve it up, you will have your routes. So end user error.
Sorry about that. I was worried that would happen. I don't have any other helpers home to make sure that
I filled in for you, Ben. You're welcome.
Okay, good. Good. So, and that's the JAMstack. Ba-dum-bum. All right. So I'm going to add in another test, and the next test is I want to make sure that it shouldn't work for the wrong sequence. Right? And then, like every awesome coder, what I do is I copy and paste the test above it, because that's how everyone should code. And then right here, we've got it to where we're up to this point, and I'm just going to change this to be like, no, this person missed. Okay, so right at this exact point, before I even tick, what I really want to happen is this should say false, like right there. And this actually going to, this one's actually going to be a problem, and I know it's going to be a problem, which is why I'm adding it. But it's this should say false the instant I click the wrong thing, as long as I've implemented everything properly, because I want instant feedback. Let's run this, and we've got one failed. And right here, it's saying that it doesn't even have a value yet. And it really should. It really should have immediately updated as soon as that happened. And the reason it hasn't had a value yet is because we haven't had any values come out of my this hasn't emitted anything yet. So I could have this start with false or something like that if I wanted to, but that's going to give me like a false positive, at least for the sake of this test. What I really want to know is that this thing is what it does, what it's supposed to be doing. Oh, another thing that I need to show you about this too, if you look at the implementation of the Konami code here, you'll see that I have this debounce time in here that gets a time of 1,000 by default, which is what I'm using. So because this is using its own set timeout and that sort of thing inside of Rx, the way that the testing apparatus in Angular is it will complain in cases where, like above, where I've got the happy path test here. If you do not have this, or even below, this is probably a better example. If you don't have this to make sure that you let enough time pass for the timer to execute, the Jasmine helpers will complain that there are what does it say, like unpurged timeout events still in the queue or something like that. So even if your test is happy, it'll still complain. So sometimes you have to add tick like 10,000 or something like that at the end in order to kind of force the zones to complete. So it's one of the weird quirks of kind of mixing timing elements of RX and Angular's testing apparatus, and hopefully they get that worked out, but that's the thing. So back to this. This test here is failing, and it's failing again because it's not emitting right away. If it was emitting right away, we would have gotten a false there immediately. So if I go and I look at this, the implementation of this is essentially, I've got this buffered debounce thing in here. So the buffered debounce, what this is doing is it's saying, I know that the source is hot in my particular case because it's button click events, or it's coming from a subject rather. So it's saying, hey, I want you to buffer everything that's coming from this source, and then give me what you've buffered up whenever a certain amount of time has passed since the last value I've gotten from that source. So this is just a weird little recipe for getting that done. So if I wait a full if I never get a full second in between pressing the controls, it's going to say, all right, it's going to build up in a buffer, and as soon as a second's passed it, it's going to give me the entire buffer as an array. This bit down here is taking the actual array, so this is going to be an array of strings, and it's really just converting it to an observable only because I wanted to use the sequence equal operator, which all that does is say, okay, well, check to see if the sequences, once they're both complete, check to see if the sequences match exactly. So it's or as it's going, if one of the items in the observables don't match because it's matching them up by index, then this will exit false. So the problem is actually that I have to wait for the debounce time to end before I actually will get those things back. But it's hard to see this way, and that's where we talk about marble testing. So marble testing was really designed for testing operators in RxJS from the beginning. That's all it was ever designed for. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is when you're dealing with things in UIs, you're dealing with things in like relatively long amounts of time when it comes to like computing, right? So like marbles were more designed initially for like what happens after one virtual millisecond passes. Well, it's not even a millisecond, it's really run at computer time, so like nanoseconds. But because you're virtualizing these things, so you're trying to do everything synchronously. And so I'm going to add a new file here called Konami code. What do they do? Spec. Yes. And then we're going to describe our Konami code. And it should work. That's the first test everybody writes, right? So, ew, it does it with double quotes. I never set up prettier. It's all right. All right. So we got to bring in our Konami code. And then I also want to bring in the test scheduler from RxJS/testing. Now, the test scheduler is, it's a little bit confusing for people what scheduling is, but scheduling is this thing in Rx where you can provide a scheduler that essentially, whenever there's an action, whenever you next or error or complete or subscribe, you can hand those actions to a scheduler, and the scheduler would dictate when those things actually occur. And there's different types of scheduling. in RX test, we're using a test scheduler. So the test scheduler kind of takes over when subscription occurs and when all of the nexting occurs, and it virtualizes it by basically queuing it all up in an array and then looping through it and executing things one at a time. So I'm going to set up the test scheduler. I don't know why I keep saying that wrong. I usually just call it RX test. You can call it whatever you like. And then before each, we need to set it up. RX test equals new test scheduler. And this takes a callback. And the callback is so you can have assertions that work with anybody's test framework. So since we're in Jasmine, I'm going to do this. Actual, expected. We just say expect actual to equal, because that'll do a deep equality check. And that's important. You want to do a deep equality check. Expected. And I'm sorry, I don't have the chat up, so if there's any questions, someone can shout those out at me while I'm going, as long as I can still finish. So this is going to set up our test scheduler new every time, and you have to make sure you set up a new one every time because it's got internal state, and if you don't set up a new one every time, it's going to keep the previous state as you go from test to test, which wouldn't be good. All right. And then there's this thing called run mode, which is what you want to do to run your marble tests. And what run mode is, effectively, is it sets up inside it, while you're inside of this block, which runs synchronously, it overrides all of the schedule commands for all known RxJS schedulers, so all the ones built into the library, to use the scheduling from this test scheduler. It also, at the end of the run block, after it gets done, will flush the test scheduler and execute all the assertions that you provide. Now this comes with a set of helpers, which are like hot, cold. Those can be used to create hot and cold observables from marbles. There's another one called time, which you can use to basically get a number based off of marbles. I'm probably not gonna use that one here. And then there is expect observable, which is the most important one. There's other ones, expect subscriptions and things that I'm probably not gonna get into today, but these are the basics. So I'm gonna go with hot because I know I'm using a subject in all of these cases. And I'm going to create a source. So I've got this source, and it's a hot observable. And what marbles look like is we have these dashes. Now each dash represents the passage of one virtualized millisecond, effectively. And then you can have single characters that say what these things are. I am going to say that U is up, and this is down. So we want to go up, up, down, down, left. If I could type left, right, left, right. B, A, start. All right. So if that is executed the way we want it to be, right now these are, if I was to subscribe to this, this is going to be an observable of strings that come through U, U, D, D, L, R, and so on. So we need to map that to the appropriate strings. And to do that, we just provide this. So this would be up, this would be down, this would be left, this would be right, B would be B, A would be A, and S would be start. Okay, so there's my series. Generally speaking, I take these things and I'm going to use it over and over again. And I'm just going to call this buttons or something like that. And just put it up here. So now I have this observable that's going to emit these strings when I subscribe to it. And what I expect after we do the Konami code is I can do this, expected. Now, spaces do not count when it comes to these things. So and this is because if you were to format something with prettier, if I was to move this over or have to move this over because spaces mattered inside the string, when I format it with prettier or whatever you might be using, it's going to move it back over and now they no longer line up. So spaces don't matter inside of these strings. These count for nothing. And we can go here and we can say, okay, well, whenever I get to here, I would expect this to be true. I'm gonna need another one of these for Booleans. So let's change that. Or add that, Booleans. E is true, F is false. And you can put anything in here, because you can put objects, other observables, whatever you like. So this is our expectation. And then I'm going to make a results observable, which is just source pipe Konami code. And then we say expect observable results to be expected. And right here we have to pass in our values because these are our booleans. So we've got T there. So that's what we're thinking is going to happen. And this doesn't end. If there is a complete in here, you would do this, right? But this does not end. So we'll pass that in. Now, when I run this, I actually know this is going to be a problem because of our implementation. So let's see. We've got 2 failed. Let's wean it down to only run these tests just to make it a little easier on ourselves. Oh, I'm not in Mocha, sorry. All right. So we've got 1 failure, and you get this kind of gobbledygook where it's like, oh, well, we expected this frame to equal this. Now, there are other testing libraries that you can use that will help pretty print these things. Nicholas Jamieson, who's on the ArcGIS core team, has, I believe it's called like ArcGIS Marbles or something like that, that has helpers for Jasmine and whatever. If you're just doing it this way, one of the things you can do to help figure out like what in the world were these 2 things or what was the actual result is frequently I just go up here and I'd say console log JSON stringify actual. And just to format it. So when I run it, if I look at this, I can go up and I can see it log this out. So I got the value of true. So it did come through as true, but I can see that it came way, way in the distant future instead of at frame 20, millisecond 26. And the reason for that, if I go back and look at my code, is that, let me collapse this. If I go back and look at my code, is this debounce timeout. And it occurs to me that I won't get this buffer until this debounce is done. Like even though, because we're closing the buffer. So what I really wanted to use here instead of buffer is another operator called window. So what buffer does and window does, they're siblings. Effectively, buffer is saying, I'm gonna build up this array and give it to you. Where window says, I'm gonna give you a brand new observable that gives you all the values and then closes whenever this thing executes. So I'm gonna bring in window, and window is a horrible name, so I'm gonna name it as window with or something like that. So we don't confuse it with actual window. And I'm just gonna change this because it's literally the same thing, only there's no to array inside of it effectively. So now when we run this, 1 failed, where are we at? It's hard with this big, huge font. Executed 0, 0. I've kind of lost it. Let me kill this real quick. So it's still actually, even with window, it's going to have the same thing because it doesn't know that the window's closed until we reach that. So what's happening now is window will only, where am I at? I'm up here. Window's only going to close whenever we've reached the limit. So I also need to say, okay, well, how many of these are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 11. So I'm going to take this code pattern, add it in there. Let me just set that up better. And then really, like, it's not just that I want to kill this whenever we've got debounce time, but we also want to end this if we hit that limit. So we're going to take only, what is it? What do we call it? Code pattern? Yeah. Code pattern length. And this is just going to be code pattern. Make sure that we import take. All right. So now the sequence can't be equal. You can't be sure the sequence is equal until it ends. So now if we end it, when we've finally taken the maximum length from that code pattern, and we might be able to even make a generic operator out of this now because I've moved this out, but we run this, let's see, where's the terminal? So annoying. There, that's better. So now we've got one success. So we actually ran it to success. We don't really need to log this one out as much, but because we've resolved the issue. And like, I know that some of this is magic because this is a very, very magical sequence of things to have to do with Rx. But really what you would end up doing is a lot of this, like if I want to make sure the timings are just right, you add these tests for the expected timing and you saw, oh, I was wrong. And then you have to go figure out what operators you need to correct that issue. If it's not super easy, but this would be a hard problem to solve even with regular imperative code. So that's that test. Now we wanted another test where we wanted to make sure that it failed immediately if the sequence is wrong. So to do that, we basically do exactly the same thing, with the exception of the sequence is going to be wrong. So we're here, and let's just say we hit left twice, and then a bunch of B's right afterwards. Basically, as soon as we get that one, we should say false there. Now, on the other hand of this, I've just entered a bunch of other things in here, which means that the window is started over again as soon as I had this problem, and it's going to be like, hey, what about these things? Is that wrong? And right here, we know that this defaults to 1,000. And that sucks because I don't want to type this 1,000 times. So I'll get to that in just a second. Right now, let's do the simple tests where we can confirm this happens properly, because that was the thing that was breaking for us before. And run it. So right now we've got 2 successes. So that was great. And just to verify that it wasn't a false success, I'll make this the wrong thing. That should fail. Yeah. So proper success. Now, the other thing is now we're like, it should time out after, by default, if no keys are pressed and sequence was not matched. Now, this is where people are like, what the hell? I don't want to do this. So let's just say we get to there. So far, so good. Everything's fine. But what we know is that after this point right here, I need to put 1,000 things in here, right? And then put like F at the end of that. And so I've seen people solve this by doing like this thing where they're like, okay, so here's what I do. I'm gonna do this, and then like, you know, I'm gonna add some string of 1,000 things in here, like, you know, they'll make some function that does that, right? Like whatever they're doing. That's totally wildly not necessary. Okay. There's a feature built into this where you can say, okay, starting here, I want to go 1,000 milliseconds and spaces don't count, and then do this. Now this is still going to be off, and I'll explain why, but we'll run it and it'll show that it's off. And it says, we expected frame 1018 to equal frame 1019, so you're off by 1. And the reason is that this character counts as a millisecond frame. So if you know you want 1,000 milliseconds, what you end up actually having to do is that. And we're passing now. So we're able to verify that delay. The other thing that you can do is do what I did in the initial implementation, where you can pass the timeout in. So I could make a lower timeout of, say, 5 or something. But that's not very realistic, because a 5-millisecond timeout for your users, unless they're the Flash, they're going to have, and that with a really, really good keyboard, they're going to have problems. So, but this is testing in a nutshell. Now, before we started the meetup, someone was asking about my tweet recently about the accessibility of these things. And the truth is that these things are probably not super accessible for code authors who are using a reader, because I have to imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, but they would get in here and they'd be like, you know, whatever, function hot called with string dash 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 u dash u dash d dash, you know what I mean? And like, unless they're savants at tracking how many dashes there's been, it's not going to help them. And visually lining things up isn't going to help them either. This is the solution for that. So you could write a much more realistic test than even this one, just by going here and saying should work realistically. And then right here, you would just take all of these dashes out and just say, okay, so let's just say they waited, oh, I don't know, how long is it? 400 milliseconds there. But if you wanted it 400 milliseconds, again, it's going to be there because this character counts. Right? And then you can go in here and just say, okay, every 400 milliseconds or so, we're gonna do this. And it does make things a bit uglier as time goes on. We don't have to care about the tailing stuff if we don't want to. You could add, you know, however many you want. You can also format these as seconds and minutes. It does not go up to hours. You would have to use some number of minutes to do that. And then to test it, I recommend still trying to line these things up. So we have 11 commands. And what we want is, again, I would seriously recommend trying to line these things up. So it's a little bit more apparent to whoever's reading this. That you're waiting the same amount of time. And then right here in the last one, we do have our true. It's not $4.99, it should be $3.99. But this is effectively the same test as the one above. The difference is it's in more realistic time. And if someone does have a screen reader, this is probably going to be slightly more understandable. I don't know that for a fact because I don't use a screen reader, but I have to imagine it makes more sense to people than dashes. But you can see this one also passed. So it's literally exactly the same thing. So if you find yourself doing these marble tests, you're like, oh, but I want to see if this, you know, if this turns off after 5 minutes, or if, you know, 2 minutes from now, and you don't want your test to last 2 minutes, you can use this and just be like, you know, 5 minutes. I can add 5 minutes to the front of it too, if I really so chose. And it'll be the same exact thing. The numbers are much more impressive though if you get it off. Like if you're wrong here and this is false, you'll see the frame that comes through, and it should be pretty nutty. Where am I at? Oh, because it's running all these other tests. Sorry. I expected that to deep equal false. Let's just run this one. So when this comes through, and you'll look and be like, oh, what's this? And on frame, oh yeah, sure, frame 304,399, that's when this happens, right? So, but it's because this is filling that in for you. So obviously there's going to be upper bounds of things you can hit, but you know, I doubt anyone's setting up observables that last 1,000 years or whatever. You should be okay. But this is kind of one of the features that people don't talk about too much with marbles. Now, again, like marble tests are very much engineered for testing operators like this. When you test operators, I recommend testing a few things. Just like what happens if you have an empty, what happens if, you know, against like a throw, that sort of thing. So, and all of these can happen with marbles. So empty would just be like, oh, I went for a while and I didn't get anything and completed. Or maybe I just completed right away. Throw would be like, oh, I went for a while and then you do this and that's like, that'll throw an error. Or maybe I threw an error right away. Then there's like, oh, well, I'm doing things and then I error, or I'm doing things and then I complete. And in some cases, you might want to test, like if you're deduping, you might want to test what happens if you pass the same thing multiple times. You just have to do things that make sense. And it's important to try to vertically align everything. So otherwise, there's no point in doing marble tests. Like that's the whole reason you do it, is so you can get a visual analysis of what's going on. Now, do I use these at work a lot? Not really. I do sometimes. So I have recently had to write something that coordinated sounds to where multiple different sounds could be queued one after the other, but don't play the same sound twice. There's like a lot of event coordination inside of that. And then you have to be able to cancel the sounds individually and so on and so forth. So in those cases, I was using a lot of marble tests to try to ensure that those things were working, because it's not something that you can test very easily with like end-to-end tests. So as far as using these things to mock in Angular, so like say you inject some service and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna put hot in there. I would honestly say don't do that. More than likely, if you're doing mocking, you can use like, just use like subject or something. So if you've got like mock service and mock service did have some get data thing on it, then just spy on it and like return a subject that you have an external copy to, because then you can next into it whenever you want. You know when it happens. You can test to see what happens before you get the data back and after. Just use a subject. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not marble diagrams. Like a lot of people get really excited about this. This is for, the best use case for this is when you're dealing with coordinating multiple different streams. And if you're doing that, I say create a custom operator to manage it and test it outside of Angular, because now you've got code. Like I could reuse this Konami code thing in a React app or in something I built in Electron or something that was just running in plain DOM. Like I can use this anywhere now, where, you know, if I built it into an Angular service and had to inject and do all these other things, like it's stuck with Angular. Like it's not, you haven't isolated that concern away to just dealing with these streams. So that's kind of my rundown on marble testing and testing practices in general. Generally speaking, always start with these sorts of tests. Like there shouldn't be much RXy stuff in there. If you have to mock an observable, use of or use subject. Subject is best because then you can control exactly when it emits and when it completes. Don't worry too much about the marble stuff. If you're using marbles, that should be for testing custom operators. In my opinion, other people do other things. Just because I said it doesn't mean it's right? Like I'm the guy that works in the library. I don't know how to implement your app for you or test your app for you. That's totally on you. And then the other thing to consider too about these sorts of tests is this isn't super readable to the unindoctrinated. Like I've been doing it for years, so I look at it and be like, oh, I know what's going to happen here. And this sort of implementation, again, this isn't super readable to some people. Actually, I have a silly bit in here where I don't even need that from. But what you want to do is either add a lot of documentation here or make these custom operators that say, oh, this is a debounced window, and then have an explanation of usage and then test that. And then this is, you know, another custom operator. So you can break things down and test those individual operators by themselves to help you zero in on the difficulties that you're having. Also, all of these operators that come from RX have their own tests. So you can go and see the expected behaviors with that, and they're all written with marbles. So you can visually see, oh, when this happens here, I know what's supposed to happen here. So it's a weird way to kind of self-document behavior if it's hard to understand just from reading the docs. All right, so let me get to questions because I have not been able to see the chat this whole time. All right, so I really want I do really want the Flash to use this, Tara. It's true. And feel free to speak up if you have the ability to do voice chat. That's fine. Let's see, I'll scroll up. I review all possible methods. So it looks like Alexander has a Udemy course on RxJS unit testing in Angular. That's pretty cool. I haven't seen that, but I'm really happy that people are making content like that. Trust me, it really helps. And then what other questions? Oh, the why should we do tick 1000? I think I covered that, but in these tests, again, like my app component spec, these things here, if I'm doing the thing where I was to click anything after this and I don't do this, like if I did not do this, then when this test completes, it might even complete successfully, but it will ultimately error out because zones will detect that there's unprocessed timers in play, and it does not like that. So, all right, a marvelous talk. That was a good pun. I actually like that one. Thank you so much. All right, so I don't see any other questions, and I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody. Why did I spread the array into of? Is this necessary? Yeah, so there's, in this code here, there's a bunch of stuff that's not necessary. For one, sequence equal actually expects an observable. It'd be better if it expected an observable input. So here, I do have to do that, or you have to use from. From and of in this particular use case really aren't that much different. The one thing that is silly is this window right here. This is actually a window observable. I don't need from here. I've got pipe right on that. So that was a silly oversight on my part. But this here, I have to do because of the implementation of sequence equal, and it's really just unfortunate more than anything else. That probably needs to be enhanced as a new feature to actually accept something more than observables, like accept an iterator or an array or anything like that. So, what else? Anything else?
Awesome.
So I think that's it. So I don't see any other questions. If you do have any other questions, I really do honestly try to help everybody that DMs me on Twitter. My response time is not as good as Stack Overflow, and I would ask that if you have a really interesting question or whatever, I would say put it on Stack Overflow, because if I answer you in private, then other people that have the same question can't see it. So if you put it on Stack Overflow, you can even link it to me. Odds are someone will probably give you the correct answer before I even get to it, but I'll try to get to it if they don't. And that way it's out there and indexed and everybody can see the answer and it makes more sense. So that's it. Let me unshare.
Okay, can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah. So someone asked me if I have an online tutorial. There are online tutorials through RX Workshop, which is like a subsidiary of this dot. That I don't know if they're still published or not. I think they are. There's RxJS Live is coming up in London this next month, and I'm doing a workshop there, and I do not think that's sold out. And what everyone should know is when I do workshops, I donate my profits. So after expenses, I donate my profits to various charitable organizations. I've done Women Who Code. I've done techcolor.org. More recently, I did Vets Who Code. So it's something that hopefully makes coming to the workshops more attractive. I just like doing the workshops because I like teaching it. And so, like, again, everything after my expenses goes towards those things, and I've been able to donate a lot of money to those causes, which is great. So something to look for, and that's again at RxJS Live in London, end of March, mid-March, end of March.
Awesome. Thank you for this talk, Ben. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Well, please feel free to join all our meetups. Remember that we organize this also on React and Vue, and we have a special session on our next Angular meetup, the state of Angular. So don't miss it. Be here and tell your friends. Bye.